tension today. Philippines turns up heat over disputed sea, but confronts formidable foe. A recent voyage in the South China Sea revealed the challenge as a flotilla of wooden fishing boats drew an armada of Chinese warships and Coast Guard vessels. As several wooden fishing boats embarked from the Philippines one recent morning, more than 40 Chinese Navy, Coast Guard, and other vessels steamed toward them from the opposite direction, staging one of the biggest demonstrations of force in the contested South China Sea in over a decade. The fishing boats were less than halfway to their destination, a ring of reefs and rocks known as Scarborough Shoal, when a Chinese Coast Guard ship appeared on the horizon. Those aboard the fishing boats, including Washington Post journalists, watched as the Chinese ship cut across the reflection of the setting sun. A second Chinese vessel arrived, then a third. Before nightfall, the Philippine convoy was encircled. The Philippines has been waging its most vigorous campaign yet to push back against China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea. After Ferdinand Marcos Jr. became president 2 years ago, he launched a campaign backed by the United States and other allies to resist China's efforts at projecting military and political dominance over this strategic waterway, which is also claimed in part by 6 other governments. But over the past year, the Philippine effort has also demonstrated the limits of its power. In China, the Philippines faces one of the world's largest maritime forces, which has routinely rammed, swarmed, and pounded Philippine vessels with water cannons. Manila's drive to establish a new status quo in the South China Sea has been largely dismissed by Beijing, which has doubled down on its claims over the waterway, said Greg Poling, director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at the DC-based Center for Strategic and International Studies. The Philippines claims dozens of disputed islands and maritime features such as reefs that fall within what it calls the West Philippine Sea, recently building military facilities on the contested Pag-asa Island and deploying warships to another atoll called Sabina Shoal. Speaking at an international security conference in Singapore late last month, Marcos warned, "The lines we draw on our waters are derived not from imagination, but from international law. I do not intend to yield. Filipinos do not yield." Nowhere in the South China Sea is the Philippine campaign and its limits clearer than at Scarborough Shoal, which Chinese warships seized in 2012. Scarborough sits 140 miles off the coast of the Philippines, well within what the country deems its 200-mile exclusive economic zone. But China says it has indisputable sovereignty over the shoal, which it calls Huangjiadao. For a decade, Chinese ships have blocked Philippine fishermen from accessing its inner lagoon and chased away vessels that have drifted too close. Now, the Philippines is again pressing its claim to Scarborough. The Philippines is working with allies to ramp up surveillance of maritime activity, say Philippine Navy officials. The Philippine Coast Guard and Bureau of Fisheries last year began regular patrols to the shoal. And last month, Philippine fishermen and activists undertook a privately organized mission to distribute supplies to other fishermen operating near Scarborough, and in doing so, assert the right of Philippine civilians to sail through these waters. But hours before the flotilla departed May 15, aerial surveillance imagery and ship tracking data showed scores of Chinese vessels cruising toward the shoal. Not since 2012 had there been such a show of force, said Ray Powell, an analyst at Stanford University's Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. A few dozen Philippine fishermen dropped out from the voyage days before departure because of concerns their small boats would be wrecked by Chinese water cannons. But the bulk of the convoy decided to press on. At a news conference after the Philippine flotilla had set sail, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry, Wang Wenbin, said Beijing planned to defend its rights. Relevant responsibilities and consequences, he warned, shall be borne solely by the Philippines. Scarborough had long been one of the most prized fishing grounds in the South China Sea, drawing boats from the Philippines, China, Vietnam, and elsewhere. Older fishermen recall a sparkling blue lagoon with schools of fleshy mackerel tuna and coral reefs that hid a buffet of rockfish, needlefish, and clams. Over much of the past century, the Philippines laid claim to the Shoal, occasionally expelling boats from other countries. The Shoal served as a precious harbor for Philippine boats trying to make it home through storms and typhoons. Its proximity to Luzon, where the Philippine capital, Manila, is located, also made control over the Shoal a matter of national security. So it came not just as a shock but an embarrassment to the Philippines, say current and former officials. When following a lengthy confrontation in 2012, the Chinese effectively took it for themselves. Trouble erupted when Philippine officials said one of their warships had caught Chinese fishermen at the Shoal poaching rare animals and corals. After the Philippine Navy intervened to stop the fishermen, China responded by dispatching 2 law enforcement vessels. The Philippines eventually withdrew its ships, but the Chinese remained. It was a turning point in the South China Sea, said Renard Sexton, a political scientist at Emory University who studies conflict in Asia. Scarborough became a symbol of what could be gained and lost in an era of rising Chinese power. For Beijing, on the cusp of a massive military buildup at sea, it was a statement to the world that China would not back down. After that, China stationed at least one Coast Guard ship at the mouth of the Shoal at all times. Chinese maritime militia government-funded ships used to establish China's presence in disputed waters shadowed Philippine fishing boats near the Shoal and sometimes confiscated their catches. Revenue for fishermen who used to rely on Scarborough diminished so much that some quit fishing entirely, say union leaders. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, an international tribunal, ruled that China had no legal claim to the Shoal and could not block Philippine boats from fishing there. But China dismissed the ruling. That same year, Rodrigo Duterte was elected president of the Philippines, pursuing warmer ties with China and muting claims in the South China Sea, already underfunded. The Philippine Navy and Coast Guard languished under Duterte, said Jose Antonio Custodio, a Philippine military historian. China's grip over Scarborough had tightened sharply, say Philippine and Western security analysts, when in 2022, the Philippines elected Marcos as president. At his first nationwide address, he made clear that the Philippines would not abandon even 1 square inch of territory.